Welcome back. Happy Halloween and a special edition of Finding America. I thought today I would tell you a story about a family, rich family, very wealthy family that lived near where I grew up. Got a little cold going on. It's the weather. You know how it is here in Oregon. You can hear the rain probably. So it's an interesting story, and it is filled with scary stuff, and this family just fell apart and people got murdered. And it's just a horrible, tragic story that happened back before the 1950s. In between, most of this happened between the Great Depression and the 1950s, and I'm going to tell you about it right now. So, where I grew up, it's called Redondo Beach, California, Torrance, South Bay of Los Angeles. If you look at a map, you'll see what's called the Santa Monica Bay. The northern part is Point Dume, that's the top of the bay, and then Palos Verdes is the other little nipple of land, it's a peninsula, on the southern side of the Santa Monica Bay. And I grew up on the southern side, right next to Palos Verdes, in Redondo Beach and Torrance. It's one of those places where it's so close to each other that, you know, you're just, every time you move, 1 month or 1 year you might be in Redondo, 3 years later you're living in Torrance, and, you know, when you're young, that's what happens. Where my family wasn't really stable till I would say, in high school. Then we bought our house, we lived in our house, and my mom died there. So yeah, anyway. So where I grew up, there was always these stories about a haunted mansion in Palos Verdes. Now, there's a part of Palos Verdes called Portuguese Bend. And that area, it's like it's this peninsula and it goes right down to the ocean, but the land is always shifting there. There's a road called Portuguese Bend, and if you go on that right now, unless they fixed it in the last few years, it was a nightmare ever since I can remember. But you could get air. We'd take our cars up there and get launched about 5 feet in the air. It screwed up our suspension every time. But that's what we did as teenagers. One other thing we did as teenagers, we'd go up to the Vanderlips mansion, which is right there, and that's where this rich family was. Vanderlips was Frank A. Vanderlip. He was a banker, a journalist at one point, and somewhere around the 1919, somewhere in that area, he bought some land, like 6,500 acres on this peninsula called Palos Verdes, with J.P. Morgan. Yeah, J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, the guy that started that. They bought all this land, and they planned on breaking it up into cities and whatever and just parceling it out, and that was their plan. Well, something happened, like the Great Depression came along, and they decided to go out to California and see this land. He fell in love with Southern California. He thought this land was beautiful. It was amazing. So he followed through the plan of selling it off, but he took a good chunk from the top of this cliff, or about the midway up this cliff, all the way down to the ocean. I shouldn't say it's a cliff, it's hillside. All the way down to the ocean, he built a mansion. It's got a barn. It's got a riding, it's now a Portuguese Bend riding club. That's there. The mansion is still there. Well, as a kid, you hear all the stories about what happened there and what happened to the family. Frank married a woman named Narissa. It's like Narissa, but it's a Nartissa or something like that. I wrote it down because I wouldn't remember it. Narcissa, Narcissa. And they moved from Aurora, Illinois, all the way out to Southern California to live on this land. And they built, like I said, the most beautiful property. And they had kids there and, grandkids, and the mansion was passed down from family to family. Well, over the decades, some weird stuff happened there. One of the daughters of Frank had gotten pregnant. Now, this was in the 1920s, 1930s. Excuse me. I might get my years mixed up. I'm just going off memory. And I checked some notes, but it's mostly memory. So somewhere around the 1920s, 30s, his daughter fell in love with a man, and she got pregnant. They weren't married, and he was black. So back in the day, that was a serious problem. And he was not putting up with it. So at one point, he basically had someone kill the man she was in love with. Yeah. And that, 1920s, 1930s. Not saying it was right, but things like that happened. Not saying bad things don't happen nowadays, but it got really ugly back then. We all know the history of the United States and just about anywhere. So she snaps, and he doesn't want her to leave the house or leave the little compound they had to tell anyone. He built basically an asylum where she had to live and stayed there. Now, it gets weirder. So she's put in this thing, then they killed the boyfriend, and the sad thing is, a little girl of one of the migrant workers had seen the murder. They murdered her too. She was just a little girl. So then there was a fire. Oh my God. So there's a fire at one point, and some worker hears noise, looks up on the balcony, and there's Narissa. I can't even pronounce her name properly, sorry. But she's standing on the balcony, and there's flames coming out of the windows. And he's all, is everything okay? She just looked at him and said, do you want to come up and find out? And she went back into this room that was on fire. Now, she died in that, but not from the fire. She hung herself inside the mansion while other family members had been killed in the fire. So this whole thing just, I mean, this is over decades all this stuff happened. These are the stories you hear about the place when you're growing up in the South Bay. And it's like a rite of passage where you go up there and you go up there at night and you try and sneak out as close to the mansion as you can. And it's like this test, you know, how far up this dirt road can you get in this little canyon in a dirt road, and the mansion's at the top, and it's really freaky. Now it's a gated community, but back in the day there was like no other houses around there, and it was all dirt roads and all the way up to this mansion. Matter of fact, the movie Chinatown, this is how nice the mansion was. The movie Chinatown with Roman Polanski and Jack Nicholson, they filmed parts of the movie in the mansion there. So, interesting story about that, then we'll get back to the scary part. The guy who wrote Chinatown, his name's Robert Brown, and he's from San Pedro, which is right on the other side from where I live, the other side of Palos Verdes Peninsula. So he knew the area. Well, while they were filming on the property, one of the Vanderlips kids or descendants kept hassling Roman Polanski, and Roman Polanski couldn't stand him anymore. This guy was driving him nuts. So Roman Polanski and the writer got together and changed the name of the dam that breaks and kills a bunch of people in the movie Chinatown to Vanderlip Dam. Yeah, real story. So there's all these horrible stories about the place. And when you're a kid, you go up there. And it's like you and your friends get together and you get up there and you're like, it's horrifying. I've been there. I've done this, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But there were stories of these dogs that they take the vocal cords out so you couldn't hear them bark. You just heard like a heavy breathing when they were barking, so they could bite you before you see that they're coming. You don't hear them from a distance. So everyone's afraid of these dogs. Some people say when the dogs barked, a light came out of their mouth like it was glowing. So I heard that a few times. There's also a story about a floating lantern at the top of the hill by the property, and it would just roam through the winding little trails they have up there. There's not any big trees or anything. It's mostly shrub brush, and they could see this lantern wandering up through the trails in the middle of the night, then come back down to the house. And they said it was just freaky. I never saw that. Well, as the years go on and people start sleuthing, finally the family's all those urban legends, they're all BS. Narissa died in 1966 of natural causes in New York. Frank Vanderbilt, the same time, right around the same time, passed away in New York also. They had left and gone to New York at some point. So all those stories are total BS. Kind of. There was also a story about a woman wearing like a nightgown, standing on the property yelling, "You don't belong here," and screaming it and freaking people out. That one I've seen. And that one I'm here to tell you is 100% true. That there's a woman that was up there and she was in a gown of some sort, like a nightgown, and you could see the silhouette. We all saw it. We all saw her. And she was yelling, "You don't belong here." And that freaked us out, and we started heading back down to the truck. And that one's true, 100% true. So this whole time, me and a bunch of friends, like 5 friends, go up there to Vanderlip. We're going to check out the whole thing and see what, it's your rite of passage as a high schooler in, the South Bay of Southern California. It's been so long, I don't even remember most of the guys' names that went with us that night. Matter of fact, I only remember 2, and there was like 8 of us, I think. We all got the back of one guy's brother who was like 17. We were all like 15, couldn't even drive. We get in the back of his truck, back in the day when you can actually get in the back of a truck and not have to worry about getting pulled over. So there's about 6, 7 of us in the back of the truck, like 3 in the front of the truck, and we head up there. It's the middle of the night. We pull up to this dirt road. There's a little fence. We wind our way through the fence, and we start walking up this path. And we could see the house in the distance. No glowing lantern. There were some lights there. We're working our way up there. We're getting close. We're getting really close. I'd say if there was music being played in there or someone was cooking in there, we would have been able to smell it. That's how close we'd gotten. So we get to this one point, and there's like a path that goes straight up to the house, and then another one that goes this way. And we were in the middle of discussing whether we should go this one because we could go up over the house and look down on it, or should we go right up to the fence of the house. So we're in the middle of discussing this, and that's when we see that ghostly woman up there. And she's got her arms out yelling, "You don't belong here! You don't belong here!" And she's like freaking us out. We all start running. And it was probably the most scared I've ever been in my life. Absolutely. We ran as fast as we could, tripping over stuff, falling over each other. I was all scraped up. And it's probably like, I don't know, quarter of a mile that we're running. Scared shitless. We're about halfway down there, and something is in the bushes right next to us, and it's making all kinds of noise, and it comes charging. You could hear it's charging towards us, whatever it was. Now, I mean, I'm only 15. I think I couldn't even think. It was like you're in slow motion. You know, you feel like you're running in water because you're so afraid. You get to the truck. I finally get to the back of the truck. I jump in the back of the truck. I'm like in the fetal position, I believe. It's been a long time, but I think I was in the fetal position. People are landing on top of me. I finally sit up. I hear commotion in the front seat of the car, like people are screaming, people are yelling. I'm not sure what's going on. The car is jerking forth and back, and it's going side to side, and we're all now screaming. I could still hear the lady yelling up there that "you don't belong here." I don't know if that was my imagination at the time or it was really happening, but we're in the car. It's jerking back and forth. One of our friends is left behind. He's still running towards the car, and the car starts moving forward, and he has panic on his face. I remember the look on his face. He was white. He was just terribly afraid of what was going on. So eventually, the truck gets to the actual road, and he's still running behind us. He's probably 10 yards behind us. Some commotion again goes on in the front seat of the car. And so we stop for a second, and he finally gets back to the car. He's in, he's crying, he's shaking, and we finally go down the road. We drove all the way back to Redondo, 20 minutes away or something like that, and we went to typical idiots. We went to the only liquor store we know that would get us beer. So I think we got a 12-pack of beer. We all drank 2 or whatever. It was unnerving. It was horribly unnerving. Well, that was my experience with it, and I got to tell you, in my life, that was the most afraid I've ever been. Now, what happened in the front of the car? One of my friends, the brother of the guy driving, had dove in, opened up the door and dove in, and he was on the floorboard. Like he jumped in the seat, like dove into the car, and his brother was getting in, and he rolled over onto the floor of the truck. Well, his head is between the gas pedal and the brake, and his brother's trying to get the car going. He's doing this, and his brother's stomping on his head because it's all dark. His brother can't figure out why the car's not moving. He's stepping on something, but it ain't the gas pedal. Finally, they get his head out from underneath there, and that's when we take off. And then when they were driving, they kept hearing we left someone behind. That's why we stopped at the street, and they're all, "We left someone behind, we left someone behind." So it was all this big commotion. So that was my experience at Vanderlips. One other time I decided to take a girl up there when I was about 19. She wanted to go see it. She wasn't from the area. She's from New York. And we got about 10 feet past the fence. She's all, "That's enough for me. Let's go back." That was as far as I got with her. But that was the absolute most scared I was, or most frightened I was in my life. That night at Vanderlips. It freaked me out. Flash forward decades later, probably 2010 or so, the family had all like passed away or moved on. I mean, grandkids were there, and now at one point, about the time I was there, around 1984, 83 maybe even 82, there was just the wife of one of the grandsons, I think it was, that was living there. And she was from Norway. They had some kids, so it was just her. The husband had passed away. And her father would come from Norway to visit right around this time that I went up there. Well, in the story, it freaked me out because she says that her father, you know, old Norwegian man, at night sometimes he used to just like to walk around the paths with a frickin' lantern. It was true. People were seeing a floating lantern because there's no lights out there. It's pitch black except for this frickin' floating lantern roaming around the trails up there. And it was just her dad, old Norwegian man. Well, then in the same story, she just died in 2009. I forget her name, but she just died in 2009. The story was done like in 2007 or something, and then she died, I don't know, probably around, or the story I probably read was probably 2008 to 2010. I don't know if it was old or not. But so she said in this story, and this killed me right there, that she was subject to far too many local boys' nightmares. Or not, their rights, I forget the word she used, but it was perfect. How she experienced far too many young men coming up there to try and see about the urban legend. And she's all, I may have played a part. I used to go out in the middle of the night when I'd hear them and yell the same thing. You don't belong here. And she goes, I would repeat it over and over and over. And she did that because when she was a young girl, she saw a scary movie, and the ghost kept saying that to people. You don't belong here. So I 100% saw it. People, most of my life didn't believe me when I said I saw it. Me and my friends at the time, we'd tell people, and they were just, yeah, okay, you didn't see a ghost. Well, we thought we did. Come to find out, decades later, we did see someone doing it. She wasn't a ghost, but we saw it, and it was real. So Vanderlips is a very interesting story. Now it's part of a gated community. The house is still there. They've got the riding club. The Portuguese Bend Riding Club is there, and that's their old barn and all that stuff. But yeah, it's part of South Bay folklore. I think the fog machine hit it a little too hard that time. Brought out the fog machine for this. Anything for you guys. So yeah, that was my experience at Vanderlips. But the Finding America part is this man fell in love with Southern California after growing up in Aurora, Illinois, and then he worked in New York City, and eventually makes it out here. And he spent a good portion of his life in the South Bay of Southern California because he just fell in love with it. It wasn't until years later, probably as he was retiring or something, he moved back, but his kids and his family, a lot of them, stayed there in the South Bay and lived in that house. Now, only in, I'd say, I might get this wrong, but somewhere around the mid-90s, it finally fell out of the family's hands, or whether it was an actual Vanderlip family member or the woman by marriage. After her, I think she's the one that sold it off, and it was finally out of the family's hands after being there since, 1919, I think, is when he bought the land, but the home wasn't built until right before the Great Depression. I forget all the exact dates, but very interesting story. If you get a chance, there's plenty of things to read on the Vanderlips mansion, including stories about a satanic cult that was in the area that they were part of. And there was a tunnel where they would sacrifice people and then take them down to the ocean through the tunnel and throw them over. I don't know why they do that. Back in the day, there was absolutely no one out there. You could have just marched them down to the ocean if you needed to, or dragged them, whatever you got to do. And no one would have been around to hassle you. So, yeah, I think the tunnel would have got you in more trouble than anything. Or a lot of effort. But anyway, all right, so that's our story about the Vanderlip family and my scary experience. Happy Halloween. See you guys tomorrow with a normal video, and Sunday we'll have a normal Finding America video. Talk to you later, guys.